And we are live now, Roosevelt. Yes.
Welcome to the book club for May. Here is your host, Madame Marie-Hélène Day.
Well, thank you, everyone. And I have to make an amendment here. It is still March, I think, but it won't be March for much longer. But we're here together. It's an exciting night because we have a terrific book and it is being presented by none other than Lorraine Campbell. And let me tell you a little bit about her before we begin. Lorraine is currently involved in politics. She currently serves as an active board member for the Customer Involved Government Committee with the City of Coral Springs. She served on the board since 2005 and has been a member of the Youth Voting Committee and chaired the Green Initiative Focus Group. With a passion for public speaking, Lorraine joined Toastmasters over 10 years ago. During her tenure with Toastmasters, Lorraine has received numerous accolades on local and divisional levels. She has also been able to form successful mentorships, teaching public speaker and leadership skills to students of all ages. And she is currently the Youth Leadership Manager for District 47. Lorraine's skills as a presenter brings a unique perspective to a variety of topics while making subject matter fun and easy to comprehend. As a coach, Lorraine has been able to help countless people overcome the fear and anxiety associated with speaking in front of an audience. Last year, she obtained her DTM, and she now has the honor and privilege of calling herself a distinguished Toastmaster. So please welcome our moderator of the evening, Lorraine Campbell.
Hello, everybody. And to the folks who aren't here, happy Passover. So we looked at Educated. This is a book that I chose, and I'm part of 2 book clubs. So I thought I'd knock out 2 books with one stone. So we did. Listen, time is valuable. You've got to use the time the best way you can. So when I read this book 3 times. And every time I've read it, it's almost like reading something new out of it. Because I think with most of us, as we become older, grandparents, parents of adult children, we look back at our youth and think, oh my God, I grew up in a dysfunctional household. But when you read this book, you're like, oh my God, we were sane, we were normal, and we were okay. Because this book is all types of dysfunction. This is like a therapist, yummy. They would never have to make a living doing anything else but dealing with this family for life. And what I found really interesting about the book is it's a memoir, and I like how she wrote it because it does touch on certain things in our families. And if you are fortunate to come from a family that you're not an only child, sometimes how you see and remember things isn't how a brother or sister sees or remembers things. And what I liked about that in the book, and she pointed it out so many times, this is how I recall it. And when you recall something, it's part of your history, your language, your life. So it was very, very interesting to see how that played out in so many ways. So we'll start off by just going through and just asking everyone, what was your favorite quote? There were lots of quotes in the book that I just went, memo to self, this is Crazyville, but you just keep reading. So, Mary Helen, what was something that was memorable, or a quote or a saying in the book that really just stuck out to you?
I wish I had taken down quotes. I confess I did not.
Or
But no, there was so much in the book that really stood out for me. You know, I grew up in the country, right? And I mean, even though her family was way, way beyond the physical stuff that we were, I think of all those times that we fell out of trees without helmets on, or rode bicycles without helmets, or you know, friends of ours that lost fingers because they went home from school and worked in the sawmill because they had to make a living. And all those physical challenges the family put her through was amazing. And I could totally relate to that on every level. But I'm going to listen to some of the other things, and more will come to mind as we go along, because I always have a lot to say. You know that, Lorraine.
Of course, jump in.
Yeah.
Chris, how about yourself? What scene or what line was memorable to you that stuck out in your head?
Well, I actually read this book or listened to it. I listened to it while driving around the country. And as opposed to most books on Kindle that I read, one thing I love about Kindle is being able to highlight quotes. And I look today and say, well, where are all my highlights? And then I remembered, oh, that's right, I listened to this one. I didn't read it. But I did think of just one piece of it that was just so striking to me. I think it was fairly early on, where she's relaying how her father remembers their neighbors, being attacked by government agents.
Rich.
And as you kept reading, you say, this sounds familiar. and you realize it was that thing that we all heard on the news, and she lived right next door. And how her family, that was almost normal to them. What really struck me is just the different lives that people can lead, even in just one country, speaking the same language, having the same country. But oh my God, was her experience growing up different from mine.
Different from everybody I know on this planet, let alone just yours. My gosh. And I definitely understand that. Barbara, how about yourself? What was a memorable quote or a scene in the movie that made you go,
Well, we read this for my other book club, and it's been many, 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 many months. And so I don't remember that specifically having a quote or whatever. From this book, and I want to talk about this later. I don't want to get into this, but I want to listen to y'all, what you have to say. But in our book club, we just couldn't figure out why she kept going back to her family. And it definitely was a dysfunctional family, definitely. But the perseverance that she had to get her PhD is the moral of the story, that you put your mind to it and you can do something.
Absolutely. I know. What is the name of that disease, that mental disorder that makes you sympathize with your captures? It's not Munchausen. What's the other one?
Stockholm syndrome.
Stockholm syndrome. That's what I kept thinking. It's like, this girl has Stockholm syndrome. Run, turn around and leave. But she kept going back. Linda, how about yourself?
Again, this book actually was quite the challenge for me. At one point, I was viscerally angry at what I was reading in this book, which I'll go into when we get a little bit beyond. There isn't one particular quote in and of itself that stands out for me. So with Barbara and with Chris not having the highlighting, that which is where I would normally have done it, I also listened to the book. I nearly gave up and said, I'm not listening to this because it was making me so viscerally upset. But I persevered, and then I did go back through and go through it a second time just to see what might I have missed because of the emotional state that I was in. Yes, I agree with you, Barbara, when you said, why does she keep going back? But I also, where you're saying that makes the rest of us look sane, I actually think in some respects, this book is quite dangerous in that respect. I grew up with a narcissistic mother. And yes, my life looks normal compared to hers. And I can only say that because I've already worked through the issues that I came out of my childhood with. So if I had not, I may never have if I had read this book. My 2 cents.
Thank you. Dave, how about yourself? What scene or what quote stood out to you in the book?
So surprisingly enough, what her father taught her, that you can teach yourself anything. And that's something that we could all take from it, even though we didn't have a background like hers.
Right. Yeah.
And she did.
In a way, he taught it to her.
In a very weird way, but he told her that, and she believed it, and she taught herself.
Yeah. Thank you. Mirtha, did I say your name right?
Yeah. I haven't finished reading the book because I got the book late. However, every time I sit and read, it's just that I have to keep reading and reading. And so many things struck me, but one of the most things that the reason why I hated the father the most, me being from a Latin American families, we don't want our kids to go. You know, we want to keep them as long as possible, right? And seeing the fact that she was only 16, 17, and even the mother and the father, you have to leave the house. I mean, if you're not helping, you have to leave. Oh my God, I said, what kind of parents are these? You know, that I said, wow, it's so different, like the culture of some countries or some families to, you know, where I belong to. But that really made me thinking that we are lucky in Latin America that our parents don't throw us out. We can live in the house as long as we want as kids, you know. A lot of us, not me, because I came to this country at an early age, young, but a lot of families, they get married and they stay. They live in the parents' house until they can afford to buy something. But we never, ever dream of throwing our kids away. I mean, she didn't know where she was going. The mother and the father, they didn't know where she was going to go. She had no more relatives or anything. So that hurt me like it was me.
I definitely could understand when she went to her room and says, "You're throwing me out," after her dad just shook her down for $400. So she only had a little bit of money. And then she turns to her mom and goes, "Well, who throws out a 16-year-old?" And she goes, "I thought you were 20. Well,
I know.
You'd know if I had a birth certificate.
Mothers don't keep track of their kids' ages, you know.
She's like, "Oh, you're 16. Oh, now you can stay. I'll talk to your dad."
That's
I was like,
so weird.
Yeah.
As you said in the beginning, so dysfunctional, very dysfunctional family.
Yeah, makes the rest of us look like we don't belong on the Jerry.
Perfect, like perfect, right?
Garfield, how about you? What was memorable, or what scenes stuck out in your head the most?
The most memorable, what I take away from the book was when she said, education demand a new worldview. In order for her to get educated, she had to create a new worldview of the world. That's what I took away from it. But in reading the book, I mean, I think she wrote it in such a way that we all could share the experience.
Mhm.
And then because we all could share the experience, we all have somebody in the family who we could think about while you're reading it. It's always it creates your own family dynamics, and that's what I liked about it. You can always put yourself in this story and eliminate the part that don't apply to you.
Like everybody has an Uncle Ted who's crazy, who lives in the back bedroom, who, you know, your mom tells you, "This is what happens to you if you don't get an education. You see Uncle Ted back there? Go to school, learn this stuff." So Dorette, thank you for coming. I know you said you didn't read the book, so hang out with us. It's a great book. I know you also have a book club. Pick it up. You could advise. It's a good one for your book club. I see that we have a few people who don't have any video on. Aurora, are you with us? Have you read and would like to participate?
Yes, I'm alive and well. I'm listening to everybody's feedback, but with distressful as it is, the emotional component, the emotional part of it, the emotional disconnect, like dysfunctional part that everybody is talking about. I felt it, and I felt disconnected. I put the book away many times, and I picked it up and picked it up again, and finally I picked it up one more time because I said, let me give it another try. I am sick of sickness, and that's what it struck me about this book. It emotionally, the disconnect with the parent, that connection is not there.
Those fanatical parents, yes.
The dysfunction, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Wetzel, have you read the book, and what was your takeaway? What was a quote or a scene that was memorable to you? All right. How about, is it Bid? Is that how I would pronounce that? Are you with us? All right. Yeah, Mary Ellen.
Yes, I think that sometimes when people don't have their cameras on, it means they don't want to be called on.
Okay.
So if someone wants to be in the conversation,
We just
they
don't
should have
go
their
to the
they should
picture.
have their cameras on, and we should,
Okay.
understand that. But this is a very interesting book. I thought much of her early life was covered, and it went very quickly and very lightly through her educational process. At least that's the way I felt. I felt there was a whole other story there that we really didn't get to hear, and it was focused mostly on her early upbringing with the family. And like any abused person, I guess we could call her abused, if you want to call it that. Yeah, a lot of times it's true when you have kids that are abused by their parents, they still want to be with their parents. It doesn't matter. So her identification with her family was so strong, and she kept going back to them no matter what. I mean, I read a recent interview with her, and she doesn't have a relationship with her mother and father right now.
They're suing her.
Yeah, they are.
I know, what do we call those? Illuminatis. I can't believe he would hire a Illuminati to sue his own children, but he's suing them. But I thought that was kind of very interesting. Out of all of the children, because she's one of 7, which child, because there are 2 groups of kids. There are the kids who are financially dependent, who don't have an education, who stay home. And then isn't it amazing that all of the kids who leave and get an education, they just don't get an education. They all get PhDs. And their father looks around and goes, there must be something good about our homeschooling teaching why they could get a PhD. And you're thinking, they couldn't run far enough from you and do a 180-degree turn to get what was their birthright, an education, because you go to school for free, and then do amazing things with it. So we'll start with you, Mary Ellen, because you're on the top, and I'm just going like this.
Well, obviously there was a high level of intelligence, innate intelligence in that particular family. When you have 3 PhDs, that's just the tip of the iceberg, because the mother, look what she did. She learned how to be a midwife. And then when she had brain damage, for goodness sakes, she learned all about herbs and how to do healing and everything. Those people, they managed to keep going even when their motor was destroyed and damaged. I think some people can't even move out of their way when they hurt, an arm or a leg. These people went full force ahead with whatever it was. And the father, obviously, he certainly had a mental disorder. Did she allude that he might have been bipolar? He certainly acted that way. He had some extreme highs and some extreme lows, and certainly he had a lot of paranoia based on, when they felt that the feds were out to get them. And, would they be that wrong to think that, because I think, federal police do keep their eye on people that are a little off the grid. Wouldn't you say?
I definitely would say, those are they're surviving. When you think about it, these are reading this story, and I don't know, jump in. I know I'm supposed to, like, there's not that many of us here today, so jump on in. Everybody else is out celebrating Passover, and we wish them well this evening. But that survivalist, it's only us. Those resources, everything that I have is in this house, and I don't need anything more. That makes you like really resourceful. I mean, every kid literally has bust through the back door with almost a limb falling off, and she was able to put them back together. You know, my daughter gets a cut, and if there's not a Band-Aid, and sometimes it just isn't, you know, it's like holy terror. But, you know, you've got legs being chewed off, burns, all sorts of stuff going on in this household. But they are survivalists. They survive. They will survive. There'll be no one else on this planet but us, and they will be survivors on their oil that they've buried, the guns, the 10 years of food that they've stockpiled. So I found that to be very, 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 very interesting. Barbara, yeah.
A couple of things. Linda, Eli, have you ever read The Glass Castle by Jeanette Walls? I couldn't read the middle of the book. I read the beginning and I read the end because I could not continue reading the same thing. I had that horrible hate that these parents could do what they did to their kids. And that's a true story too. Jeanette Walls wrote that book about her family. But it's interesting that I guess in all these books, what I don't understand is the mothers that don't protect their children. You know, I know there's a loyalty to your husband, but how can these mothers not, especially in this book, how could the mother just not protect her child? And, you know, let me clarify something. Number one, I was raised Catholic. My husband was raised Catholic, but my husband has been a Mormon since he was 25. He's a member of the Church of Latter-day Saints. And I just want to make sure that people don't get the bad idea about this book. Mormons are not like this book. They're not.
I think so. Nobody thinks so. These are those fringe people who live
She
off
said
the
it.
grid and fundamentalist.
She actually said that in the beginning of the book.
He did.
Okay.
The first line of the book was that statement.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting because there was another book that I read called Motherhood, and it was a lady who married a guy from India, and she basically made this comment in the middle of the book about, it was not even funny, about the Mormon people. And I was so mad, I emailed her at her website. She never responded. I said, you know what, you are just plain ignorant, because people who don't know about other people's beliefs or their religion should not make derogatory remarks.
Absolutely not.
And it just shows their ignorance. And I was so irritated at that woman, but she never answered me back. Now, don't you think if somebody you wrote a book and somebody read the book and said, this is disgusting. How could you say this in the book that had nothing to do with anything that you were talking about? It makes me lack any kind of confidence in what you're writing about.
Right.
No, but to get back on this one, you know, her brother was basically a sociopath or a psychopath or something. I mean, that the mother didn't protect. And then if I remember correctly, the sister totally remembered it different, that the brother never put her head in the toilet, that I'm just
by the hair, beat her up.
I was just
stabbed the dog. His list of things were just crazy. Linda, you got your hand up.
Yeah, I was going to add that, like, I grew up in a fundamental Christian, and they were not quite as survivalist as that aspect, but the underlying rules and regulations that were associated with it were not a whole lot different than the rules and regs that were thrown in there by this father. And I was just going to add that while Barbara was speaking.
While I was reading the book, and I have 3 brothers, I'm the only girl, and I kept thinking, does this man know that she's a girl? It's like, does he know that she has a daughter? There were just so many times that I felt that she could have like lost a limb or a life, and he was just like, the angels are with you. The angels, you know, you're not dead, you can walk. And she's walking back to the house after one of the injuries, I think, where she's inside the dumpster and she has to hold on while he empties it. And you're like, oh my goodness. And he was like, okay, make your way back to the house. Your mom will put you back together. And it has to be some distance, because how she describes it is like she literally has to take a break in this like mile hike to get back to the house. And you're thinking, does he really not see there's a difference between sons and daughters? Or is it he just sees the work that needs to be done and you're a body to move the work? And that's all I saw of the father, is that he was just, I need it done and I need it done quickly. I don't care what the risk is, but get it done. That
But also, sorry.
go ahead.
Also, one of the dynamics that I realized is that the two sides of the family were totally different. Like the
Grandma
dad
down the hill.
was totally different from the mom's family.
Yeah.
They both saw things differently, and that was an interesting dynamic to see how they got along, or how
Right.
they didn't get along in the whole family dynamics.
Right. Because I remember there was a passage where they didn't have a telephone at that time. So if you were having your baby in the middle of the night, you had to call grandma down the hill, and she would have to walk up, and she called her ornery, and she'd be pissed off in the middle of the night. People don't go to the hospital to have babies. What's wrong with these hillbillies? And I'm thinking, oh my goodness. She must be thinking to herself, what did my daughter marry? Who did my daughter marry? What was appealing for my daughter to marry this guy? Yeah, Linda.
And that was a piece that I found was very disconnected for me. He obviously was mentioned as being potentially bipolar and had symptoms, but the mother didn't seem to grow up with that situation. And the fact, and it really was a problem for me too, that she did not protect her children. Having a daughter of my own, I would have died for my daughter. Nothing, anything that I knew, I would have taken a bullet. I would have done anything for my child. So I totally don't get that, but there's not really a reason given as to why the mother is just kind of, whatever dad says, just like as if she completely lost her own voice, and there's no reason given for that.
I wonder if it has to do with the fact that they're in a small community. It's a small secular of these fundamentalists, and he's the best of the worst to pick from. They don't go outside of their group. That wasn't happening.
Well, they did mention that she was looking for something different besides the prim and proper that she grew up for. Hence, she went for the bad boy, which, if her grandfather was an alcoholic and there was probably dysfunction in her family above the prim and proper,
Right.
makes sense. But it doesn't sound like his parents were as off the wall as he was.
Right.
So there were enough other people in the community that were basically normal, what we would expect, to be quasi-normal. So it just, that really totally threw me for a loop.
Yeah,
Barbara. Remember, it's been a while since I read this. Wasn't there an aunt that was really normal?
Yes, she lived next door to the grandfather.
Yeah, and so why didn't these kids, especially like the girls, why didn't they go over there and live with the aunt? I mean, to get out of that.
They were with her for a while. Tara and Tyler, I think. They were
Anybody want to jump in
for a
on
while.
that one? Anybody want to jump in on that one?
Well, it could have, as we said before, possibly something with Stockholm syndrome. She had the opportunity at age 7 and the interest to go to school. With grandma was going to take her, and she would have been okay, would have gotten a chance at a normal life. And she said, yeah, and then decided not to.
She did snatch her and take her to Arizona.
She tried to. She didn't.
Yeah. And that was, I think, in her little world, I think that was probably about the best that she could do. And serve her cornflakes and tell her she has to wash her hands when she leaves the restroom. And these little things that was so missing from their regular home life and home training.
Well, and it goes to the effect that psychologists have said what happens in the first approximately 6 years of life has a deep, impactful, on how the rest of your life is going to go, because you cannot consciously reject anything that's taught to you. So no matter how dysfunctional or how wrong it is, that's what you know, and to you it seems normal.
But I heard an interview with her, and one of the reasons she gave for writing the book was that she was really having a hard time being estranged from her family. That was one of the reasons why, and that was way after the whole incident. So that just goes to show you how bad she feel about not being a part of her family, even though it just wouldn't work with her anymore.
I guess that also comes back to what we're talking about, is that when you have a family, and it's a large family, 7 kids, and the only thing that you can rely on is your family, that thinking that there's anything else outside of your dynamic, and as and you're constantly been talking about the Lord this and the Lord that, and the angels and we're the chosen people. So leaving that, even though you know that your family is bat crazy, there's still that thing deep down inside you. We all want to make peace with our family. Even when you're adopted, you could have great adoptive parents. They could give you the world and be warm, but you still want to know who you share DNA with. That bond that you have with people that we call mother, brother, and father are still those people that you still want to make peace with. And when she surrendered and go, I need some therapy, because she was literally having, I think she was at Harvard at this time, having a nervous breakdown. She was not functionable and had to ask for help. And I think, if I remember correctly, I think that was the first big help that she actually called out for, because she didn't even want to take the money from the bishop when her tooth was about to implode in her head. But she took the aspirins. That, I thought that was interesting, because she, as her mom said, that is the medicine of the devil. It causes birth defects and all of these crazy stuff. And her mom sends her a care package, not with stuff for her tooth, but how to get the aspirin out of her system. just crazy. So one of the question is, and we've kind of touched on it a little bit, can you be normal and fit into society after you've grown up in such a different household? Can you? What do you think? Yeah.
My question is toward Linda. You said you grew up in a very traditional, almost cultish background. Is that right? Or fundamentalist?
Very fundamentalist, yes.
So I would think being shunned from the group would be an awful punishment if you had that sense of being different and unique and special.
Mine was slightly different in that, number one, I'm an only child. So I had no other siblings to bounce ideas or as a support system. But for whatever reason, when the narcissistic behavior really started to come out with my mother, when I entered puberty and became what she considered, I guess, a threat to her for some reason. And I remember making a decision at age 12 when I was laying on the floor with my hands over my head, trying to protect myself from the 2x4 she was hitting me with, that I could not be left alone with her. And from that point on, I would get up on Saturdays. My dad worked on Saturdays. I would get up, I would do my work. I would go in my room and lock my door until an opportunity came where I could leave the house and I would not be left alone with my mother. But I made that decision consciously. And it was something I knew that if I stayed there, she would have killed me. And I remember that day as if it was yesterday. And she would have killed me. So But again, I didn't have the dysfunction that this girl was raised with at the younger age.
Right. Because I thought Stephen was going to kill her. I kept thinking,
Sean.
this one is going to kill you. And did he have a head injury also?
But
Yeah.
that was later. Yes, he was that way before the head injury, and it got worse afterwards.
He was, I thought, how can you be in the household and your brother drags you by your hair? You hear the screaming and the kicking going on, and your mom is like, hey, you guys, cut it out. You know,
Well,
guys, cut it out is what you say when your kids are like teasing each other, or one hits the other, not when one is pummeling the other, and just he's just a woman beater. That's it. He is abusive and mentally abusive also. He just, I don't know why somebody married him and then had children with him. Good night.
The other
Actually, in that book, it was, no, in the book, when he was dating the first girl, Sadie, it was really a good illustration of how the mental games he played on.
Right. No, I don't want the Snicker. I asked for a Milky Way. No, I don't want a Milky Way. Where's the Snicker?
Yep.
Yeah.
He exhibits narcissistic tendencies.
And when she came back from maybe, I think it was Cambridge, and she saw him and he had a beard and a BB gun had taken out an eye and it was cloudy. And you're just looking at somebody who looks like the Grim Reaper. That was how I saw him. And then he's like, hey, you want to go for a ride? And I'm like, don't get in the car with that fool. Don't get in the car with that fool. And she goes, sure. I'm like, you are a sucker for punishment. Have you not seen that he does Mr. Nicey and then he turns into the psycho and he turns off that car and she can't even make eye contact with him because he's just so vile.
Did anyone question whether everything that was written was the truth? Or did we all accept it as written?
He accepted it. I don't think there is a reason for her to say something that it didn't happen. I thought it was, even I'm in the half of the book, but I believe everything that she wrote.
Well, you
but
gotta remember
actually-
too, it's her perception
Right.
at different stages because other people in her family had different perceptions too.
Right.
And didn't she even question her own memory
He did.
of things? Yeah.
But
And,
she-
I certainly, I believed it, but it was unbelievable. I mean, if they're in that car accident and her brother's brains are spilling out of his head and she is going to take him to the hospital and is afraid to call her parents because they will tell her to bring him home instead of that was unbelievable.
But that's exactly what he said. Bring him home, Mom, fix him. Like, she's got the magic touch.
Yeah.
Click, 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 click.
I mean, that did seem unbelievable to me, but I do believe it.
There's something very interesting that I got on that too, that how everything is God's will and all the accidents were so that the mom could learn about the herbs and things like that. But very interestingly, when their grandson Peter was born at 1 pound, all of a sudden it was okay to take him to a hospital for multiple surgeries to save his life and everything else. That seemed a bit hypocritical to me as well on the parent side of things.
Huge hypocrites. I think the father, that his name is Papa Hypocrite, because there wasn't anything that he was ever responsible for.
Yep.
He was responsible for absolutely nothing. It's the Lord's way. This is what God wants. Everything is, it's never his responsibility. That his, he's got kids that all they want to do is run away and don't come back. And even the ones that stayed, other than Audrey, she was a bit of a mixed character, that one. But again, your livelihood comes from your parents. What are you going to do? Yeah.
You know, apparently the mother did create a business that was quite successful selling herbs.
Butterfly Express, $4
Yeah.
million. It's I
Yeah.
think it's still around.
It is still around.
Yep, still around. Yeah, and he's handing out crisp 50s to homeless people. You're like, uh-huh. But did anybody, I mean, you don't want people to die, but when he caught on fire, I was like, oh, thank you, God, you're dead. And I'm going,
No.
crap, you still alive? How do you live through that? It's like, he's like, you know that you're so screwed up, not even Jesus wants you back. He was like, hell no. No, you can't come back here. Stay down here and make some more trouble. Because, I mean, when she described her mom using a butter knife to peel and separate his ear, I'm going, and you're not in the burn unit at your trauma center. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
But at the same time, though, those accidents or those incidents is what allowed the business to be successful. If you really read because people start believing in it.
Yeah.
Because they thought he died a couple of times, and she resurrected him.
Yeah.
So that gave them credibility for the business.
Yeah.
You know, that just goes to show the strength of belief in something. I mean, it's just amazing.
Yeah. You know, when she got over her concussion, because her concussion was horrible, because she was in literally living like a mole in her house in the basement because she couldn't take the light, and they made fun of her raccoon eyes and her memory loss and all of these things that you're thinking, you people, I mean, everyone has a spiritual light. I don't care if it's Buddha, Allah, Christ, or the universe. But these people were like believers to the third degree. And
it was convenient.
Yeah, when it was convenient. Because as you said, they took that little one, as she said, he just fell out in her hands, and because she knew she was not skilled enough to do
But remember, there's a lot of times throughout the story when she keeps saying that hopefully nothing goes wrong. So she knows that her talent only goes to a certain level. And she always worried about taking them to the hospital after the effect and what they need to tell the doctor. She was just there or something like that. So she really understand where the level of her skill went.
But I also think a lot of that had to do with the fact that she could be sued if there were a problem. I don't know that it was so much that I think it was to avoid repercussions financially to her family if there was something and a lawsuit was filed.
Because jail scared them.
Absolutely.
I mean, don't get me wrong, scares me too. But that would be like, living totally under the realm of the government, which was one of the things that they were just totally against. One of the other questions was, other than the author, which character stood out the most to you? And why was this, was it a personal influence that you found with another character? What other characters stuck out to you? Because I mean, the biggest ones are the dad and Tara herself, but there are other characters in her story, other family members. Who else stuck out to you in the story? Yeah, Linda.
The one character that stood out for me was actually the boyfriend, Charles.
Mm-hmm.
And how, when he saw how dysfunctional her family was, and so instead of asking him and trusting him and wanting what's going on in that, because as far as we know, he was also a Mormon, just not as fundamentalist as they were. Rather than asking him for a different perception, she basically just cut it off with him because she couldn't handle him seeing the dysfunction that she had at home. And he cut it off with her as well because he could tell she was pretty messed up, I think.
Right. I think one of the scenes that made me think is when he goes, your house stinks and you smell funky too. And because she hadn't been to many other people's homes, when this is all you know, and I got the impression that housekeeping was not this woman's main thing. So it wasn't a clean house. The house that she grew up in, the white picket fence, the well manicured, well put together, polished, difference between white shoes and cream shoes to go to church in. There was not the household that, she talked about laundry being everywhere. So it was pretty nasty. But if you don't go to other people's homes, you're just like, I'm living in a Taj Mahal. So Charles was very, very interested. Because he did say to her, I can't do this with you. Yep. It's like, you guys are crazy, but you don't even know you're crazy because you don't let anybody else into your little circle. Yep. Yeah. Mary Ellen.
You bring up a lot of different things there. When she went away to college and she never cleaned, right? She never cleaned. But, again, people come from their own homes and they do certain things. When I was reading all the things that she was going through when she went away to school, all I could think of is when I sat in the cafeteria in my first year in college and I picked up the pork chops and I ate them with my hands because that's the way we used to eat them at home. Now, of course, in polite society, you don't eat things with your hands that way, of course, but it just brought back that, maybe I'm not doing the right thing, or can I not fit into this? Yeah. But the thing I wanted to ask you is, do you think, and I mean, Barbara, you have more observation ability than I do, like within the Mormon culture in itself, do they have spaces for people who are somewhat outliers? I mean, they have those polygamous families that live in the mountains or wherever they live on television. I have no idea where they live, but do they have a space in Mormonism for these kind of outliers? And so there's an acceptance of them in some form or another in their heads.
No, many years ago, when the law of the land became that you could not be married to more than one person, the real Mormon Church of Latter-day Saints, did away with that multiple marriage. So that was many, many years ago. And one of the things you have to remember back then is, like Brigham Young, he had many wives and many children. Brigham Young, they traveled across, they were religious, they were persecuted religiously. Just like, why do you think people came to America? Because they were being persecuted for their religion. When the Mormon religion started, the same thing. So they kept going west and ended up in Mexican territory, which that's what Utah was. And because there were not that many men, they traveled and men died, etc. That's why Brigham Young and other Mormon men would marry more than one wife at the time. But when the law of the land changed and Utah became part of the United States, absolutely no. That is not part of their religion. They do not associate with these cults. None of that. Those cults that are out there that have the same type stuff, no. The Mormon Church is just like any other church. It is very, very, very family oriented. Their children, they could outspeak us as Toastmasters. I can tell you right now, they get up in church and they give their testimony, they give speeches, and it's just something else. Wow. But the Mormon Church is so community minded. They take care of their church members, and they are actually helping one of our Toastmaster families, some dear friends, and some of you may know them or may not. David Jess knows who they are. But David Clark and Kathy Koinagi have been, David, you know who they are, correct? They have been going through some very hard times because he has lost his job. Kathy's had cancer. She went blind a number of years ago. And then David lost his job that they had moved from Michigan down here. And a couple of Toastmasters had gone up there and helped them take stuff to their storage unit. We helped them clean out one here. I went to Cocoa twice and helped them up there. But they went and moved up with and they were actually living in one of our Toastmasters' houses that they gave them to stay in. That's what our Toastmaster family is about. But on the other side, David's cousin in Orlando invited them to come up there and stay. And I said, okay, what's happening with the move and everything? Her church organized members to drive a truck to Michigan with all their stuff from the storage and also to help them in other ways. And I said, well, what church is that? And she said, it's the Church of Latter-day Saints. And I went, I am not surprised. His cousin is a member of this church, but that's what they do. They reach out to the community and they help That's how George and I got our shots. They organized the shots right there at their church in Stewart. So easy. We went down there at 6 o'clock on the day they told us to, and we got our first shot. We went back a month later and got our second shot. That's why I guess I feel that I really have to be part of this to let people know they're Mormons are not weird people. They're really not. They are unbelievable Christian people who care about their families and care about the community.
Well, Barbara,
And people just don't understand the whole religion.
But if you remember, dad always get in trouble when he goes to church.
I was just about to say that.
Because he was really never a part of it. He just think that they were weak people.
Yeah.
So
it's been a while since I read the book, but I thought, yeah, he is obviously not a typical Church of Latter-day Saints, let me tell you.
They thought he was crazy. They thought he was
not.
fanatic.
He sets himself up as God, actually.
The
The father really sets himself up as being God.
Oh, yeah.
Because when
there was obviously something in his personality that was bonko wonko. He could have been raised a Catholic. He could have been raised a Lutheran. He could have been raised Jewish. And I think that same bonko wonko would have happened in that religion no matter what it was.
But didn't you find it interesting that wherever she goes, she finds stability in the church? She always go to the church and she always getting like the bishop or those, she always finds stability there. So, it must have been,
Well, it's interesting too, not to go on and on about George's church, but every single one, their ministers are not paid. Their ministers are called bishops of the wards, and the only people that get paid are people who actually run the church, just like Toastmasters International. We have people up in TI that obviously get paid for accounting and the jobs they do, etc. Just like in his church, only those people who are in Salt Lake City actually get paid. All of their church leaders, all of their bishops, all of their elders, none of them get paid a penny. They don't have ministers like
I didn't know that.
Churches. Yes.
Wow. Talk about a labor of love.
It's called a calling. My husband's son was a bishop out in Eugene, Oregon for about 7 years. Adam was a bishop. He was in charge of the church and he had leaders that helped him. Totally volunteer.
Totally volunteer. Wow. We've touched on so many things because we've done it in such a really organic way this evening. So I really I'm enjoying everyone's input and their thoughts on the book. One of the things I felt was missing from the book is that her brother loved to call her a whore, and that was one of the things that her dad was always talking about, the women in church and how they weren't dressed modest. But when she had a boyfriend, I've forgotten the name of the boyfriend in college, the one that she went to the Middle East with. I think his name was Dave. For some reason, I want to say Dave, but I could be wrong. It doesn't touch touch on that so much, but she has there's such a thing with those intimate relationships, because they talked about, in the car, and Charles put his hand on hers and she just didn't want to, it's like, she's in her little bubble and not very open to relationships. But then she has one and it doesn't say anything about it. Yeah, it's like, I'm just gonna say this out on a limb because you're 27 years old, you're back and forth with your boyfriend. There's got to be some sex going on. So, oh my God, what in the heck is her parents thinking about there? That's probably what they were talking about. That the devil's got her mind and her soul, but they didn't touch upon it, and it was one of those things I kept going. All right, well, we're gonna talk about this relationship because this is some cohabitation stuff. The Jamaicans have a word called slacky tidy, slack to mean loose and tidy to make things look good. And I was like, this is a very slacky tidy relationship because she doesn't really talk a lot about it. She breezes over it, but it's a big thing. What do you think, Mary Ellen?
I thought the whole part, as I mentioned before, I thought the whole part of her, once she went to school and went on through college, it lost its real personal touch. I feel like there was a whole book in there that should have been explained, because I think one of the things that drew us in was the fact that, hey, she had a situation, she was raised in dysfunction, she overcame that, and then she got into education. And education is really what the book's title is, Educated. But I don't feel that we really learned a lot about how she did it or what happened when she did it, other than some very superficial things. I mean, people noticed her. She got all sorts of grants. In fact, wasn't she one of Bill Gates's grant recipients? So she had to have something in those papers that she wrote that made her stand out from other people. And, you know, I wanted to know really more about that. And I just think that was kind of glossed over a little bit.
You know what happens with a lot of books?
Yeah.
They get a signed contract and they have a deadline and they've got to crank this book out. And so they're not allowed to, or maybe it's going to be a sequel, who knows? So I think part of that happens a lot of times. I read books all the time. I'm a constant reader and it happens all the time. It's like, what happened to this part? Why didn't they go into that more? And it's because they're under book deals.
Right. I kind of thought that she knew that her parents would read the book and that was something she did not want to have to. No one wants to explain that to your parents, but the rest of us, we want to, inquiring minds want to know. So I thought that was a huge chunk of your life, you know, who we date and who we share our intimate space with. You know, it was just like an afterthought in the book. It really, you know, they were there to make sure that her parents didn't kill her when she went back on the holidays to visit.
But Lorraine,
uh-huh.
one of the I heard her on an interview and she said the book started to be a book about education, but she could not get there without giving the backstory. That's really how she claimed it started. So it should be a book about education, but when she tried to put it together, it just couldn't come together without the backstory.
I think it was a book about courage, the courage to believe in yourself enough to tear those binds. I mean, as you said, the ages 0 to 6 is when you really believe. She believed that her father was God. How do you break the bonds, believe enough in yourself to go to a school? And the scene that really struck me was when she asked, "What's the Holocaust?"
What's the Holocaust? Did you know?
I mean,
holy crap.
To be just the courage to get out there when she knows how uneducated she was.
Right.
And as far as not getting a whole lot of details after she went to college and she ended up in, what was it, either Cambridge or Oxford over in it, you know, I don't think she believed it. I don't think, you know, that's the way I felt reading that part of the book is wow, how unbelievable is this? You know, that's how she felt too. You know, she couldn't come up with as much detail on that because it was just, wow.
Because the professor said there's a scholarship for Cambridge. Have you ever heard of Cambridge? He goes, no. I'm like, holy crap, that is a mountain. Yeah, Linda.
That's what I was basically going to say there. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just so, I mean, you want to shelter your kids from the harm and some of the realities, and you want to feed it to them slowly so that they can understand that, you know, there's all not pretty in this world, but they're just sheltered, just totally sheltered from the reality of life. And little things that I thought was very interesting when she said they had cable. She was like, I never thought we'd ever get a TV, let alone cable. And seeing, even though I think her dad got more fanatical, he was more hypocritical towards the end, you know, with his, I could grant absolution to Stephen. He's fine. He's great. You just got to come on board, come on back. But if you can't, then you're out. And I saw the book more as learning about boundaries, what you will and will not accept, even from folks that you share DNA with. And sometimes when you love your mom, you love your dad and your family, but they are no good for you. And she had more than enough. She had more than enough evidence to show that these people, just because you share DNA with them, they mean you know well. I mean, there's some animals in this in the animal kingdom that all they do is just give birth and you're on your own. And that's a hard pill to swallow, because you see yourself with your family, your mom and your dad, forever until you bury them. You don't think that you're going to leave them and don't come back. I mean, yeah.
Did anybody ever? Because for me, when I was reading the book, I keep going back to nature and nature, nature. Did anybody try to, because I'm always thinking about those two things.
Nature and nurture.
Yeah. Did anybody try to? Did it bring back that for anybody? Because that was surely one of the debates I was having.
Yeah,
Straight.
I was having that debate. How about you? How about
Excuse me, there was nurture in the book, really? I missed that part.
No. I mean, the debate it being genetics versus environment.
Yeah. No, I know what you're saying. I was just like, I didn't feel there was anything on the nurturing side from the other.
There was no hugs and, goodbye, John.
No. But, she was obviously intelligent, and the father was, because remember when she brought the math problem home to him that she couldn't do, and he just like, here's the answer. And he couldn't explain how he did it. So he was obviously very intelligent, and that intelligence came in. I don't think she would have left if her older brother, Richard, who actually had been gone to school, I believe he was the oldest in the family.
Right.
He actually went to school before the father really went off the deep end. And he's also one of the PhDs. And then with Tyler and her connection with Tyler via the music and things, if she had to do it just by herself, I don't think she would have ever left the family.
No, because I think she talked about the fact that her life would be, she would get a piece of plot of land for her and her husband. She would be a midwife like her mom, and that's what her life would have been. And she didn't see any other, there wasn't anything outside of that. There was just no other, like kids, I'd like to be a police officer and an astronaut. There wasn't none of that. There was just none of that at all. So it was, it was very, 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 yeah.
Did they have any television at all when she was being raised? Was there any television?
Y2K, I remember her talking about what her dad watching because everything was going to go off at Y2K. So at that point they did.
Right.
They had computer.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. But didn't you find it interesting that, the world was coming to an end and this whole big thing, and they buried the food and the guns and the water and the whole 9 yards. They got their doomsday prep, and nothing happens, and they go about the next day like nothing.
And I'll tell you, my parents thought that was the second coming of Christ was going to be Y2K. That is how much they believed and how fundamental they were.
So what did they think of what happened on January the 1st?
They never really talked about it. And it was like, oh, we were wrong. They didn't even say we were wrong. It's just, but it was just.
Treated it like how the book treated it, like they just got home and went to work the next day.
Yep, basically.
I guess that's how you deal with it.
Lorraine, real quick, having listening in so far, I wanted to find out regarding the dad. Was there any influencers in his life? Anyone from the community, anyone from his family, anyone from the past that he showed any kind of reverence or respect? Because I know you mentioned that he thought he was God himself and how he operated.
Person and in the dad's life was that other voice inside his head that everybody else had the dysfunction of having to listen to. He just literally beat his own drum and everybody else had to follow it.
And I wanted to inquire about his wife. You made mention that based on how she was raised, she obviously had a transition after being in an environment with him where she wasn't upkeeping the house. And were you referring to the wife at that point?
The mother, and you
The
know,
mother.
jump in. The mother she was interesting also because there was a couple of times that I thought that she was taking her, going down another path. And that was when the daughter was going to dance class.
Mhm.
And they're, as I said, they're fundamentalists, so they covered up, you know, there was no, you know, and so she was taking dance lessons. So she shows up in steel-toed combat boots, jeans and a t-shirt, and you know everybody else looks, you know, cute and pretty in their leotards. And even she was very judgmental about the other girls, about how unmodest they looked. But her mom did get her some leotards and made her fit in with the other girls. And she just, we won't tell your dad. And I was like, oh, one for the mom team. But that didn't last.
Did
I
anyone
want-
from the wife's family try to intervene, or were they aware of what was happening in the household?
Yeah. Mary Ellen, you answer that one because, you know.
Yeah, I think, wasn't there the family down the hill with the
Down
pink
the hill.
bedrooms, and that's where the wife came from. And when,
The family down the hill, I think, was the father's family.
Yes.
no,
yeah.
no, it was the
Yes.
mother's.
I thought the grandma over in town was the mother.
Yes.
No, the father was grandma, over in town was the dad's.
No, wasn't the father's mother the one in Arizona?
I should have
No,
wrote
but
that
she didn't
down.
live
Yeah, I
in
think the
Arizona.
father's mother was the one in Arizona. It was the mother's family that lived down the hill.
No,
Down
the
the
father's mom. She didn't live in Arizona.
Well,
Yeah.
They went
It
there
was his sister. It was an aunt, wasn't it?
right.
Garfield.
They went winter time.
Yeah, it was it was an aunt that lived down the hill.
And
No, the mother, the grandmother was down the hill.
Yeah, it's a
Yeah,
grandmother.
grandmother was down the hill
Was it-
because that grandma down the hill was the one who wanted to take her to Arizona.
Exactly.
Oh, is that it? I
Yeah,
get confused.
I
Exactly.
know.
Yeah,
Sorry.
and
Was
that,
that the only
that was
incident?
the dad, that was the father's parents,
Yes.
grandma down the hill, because the
Yes.
father had the horse, the grandfather had the horses and things. So
That's
that's why
right.
he was on that land there in Bucks Peak.
Right.
But the other one was grandma in town was her mother.
Right.
But you never
know,
heard
the white
anything
fence.
about her father that much there.
There
No.
was one story about her father who got hurt by the horse or whatever, and then he crawled his way back to the house.
These people
And
would
then after
be-
that, he heard voices.
yeah.
After that, I heard voices.
After
Yeah.
that, I hear
Hmm.
voices. These
Interesting.
people would they would be denied health insurance in our
Yeah, really, really. You're absolutely right about
The
that.
author has any family, is she now married, any children? What's the status? It's not known in the book?
Well, she's battling, I guess, lawsuits against her parents, who is saying that this is all fictitious.
How
right
old is
now.
she? Because I obviously haven't read the book as
Early
yet. But how
30s. She should be in
And-
her mid to early 30-ish.
34
Fairly young
or
woman.
35. She's 34, 35.
34,
But she
35.
haven't mentioned having a husband or any kids, because it would be interesting to know how she's, you know, handling her family compared to what she came from.
No,
But nothing was mentioned about that.
Yeah, at the end of the story, she
Move your
she
microphone,
still,
Garfield, closer to your mouth. Or
at the end of the story, she did get she only visit the mom side of the people, the mom relative.
Yeah, after the funeral,
yeah.
after the funeral.
She was born in 1986.
Okay,
Okay.
She's
Okay.
young.
34.
So
Mhm.
she would have been 14 for Y2K, or 13 or 14 for Y2K.
And then she wrote the book right, I think a little bit after her PhD. So she wrote the book in her late 20s, early 30s. So somewhere right around that, because I think she said she got her PhD at 27. I was like, adventurous. Feel
Now,
like
Garfield mentioned that her ultimate goal was to write about education, but she felt as if she had to go back to the foundation in order to speak concerning education. So we're asking earlier, what was the shift? What caused her to transition from that lifestyle to what she's promoting now? And her ultimate goal in writing about education, is it to give credit to that as her deliverer or her rescue? Or what can take you from one environment to the next? What was her ultimate goal in writing about education that wise?
go ahead, Linda.
I felt that a lot of her goal in writing about the education was the fact of how much she actually didn't know and how much just going to school and getting a regular education doesn't mean that you have to believe everything that you are told, but yet you get to see other versions or other sides of the story. Exactly. For instance, when she got the Ruby Ridge, what she remembered from her childhood and what her father had said. And then when she heard about it and then did the research, went, whoa.
He's alive.
Opposite ends of the spectrum there.
Because she told
education was like an enlightenment for her.
Exactly.
Exactly.
So, and that was one of the things that I'm quite sure many of us on the call can kind of understand, is that, you go to college and there's just so much you can teach, your parents can teach you, and you're like, why didn't my mom teach me that I shouldn't eat pork chops with my hands in public?
Culture different.
Yeah, these things. And so, but with her, it was just so much and so big, like the Holocaust. It was just so much stuff that she realized that, oh my God, I don't have a gap. I have an avalanche in my life of missed stuff. And when she was looking to make a little extra money, and she says to the lady who's looking for a babysitter, and she goes, well, I guess you can do it after school. And she goes, oh no, I could babysit anytime. What time do you need me? She goes, well, don't you go to school? She goes, well, something like that. I think is her response, and you just grow. It's like dough, like these are self-raising children. Add water, stir, poof, you've got kids. What
was her call to action at the end of the book? Like the last chapter, what did she leave you with? After all that chaos that happened in her life, you get to the last chapter. What was her call to action? What did she want the readers to leave with or to do?
I can't remember the last chapter because you just so much.
Because there must have been some kind of light at the end of her tunnel.
The ending, we all probably took 2 good deep cleansing breaths after that thought, yes, I don't come from a dysfunctional family.
But you know something, I don't think I don't think she is a good relator. I don't think she has an easy time relating to people on a very intimate way, at least people outside of her family. And that's why I feel that the loss of her family is probably still deep. I saw an interview that she did, probably maybe the same one you saw at Garfield, and questioning, whether or not she still had a relationship. And she only has a relationship with half of her family, not with her parents. So there's this void. But, the interesting thing about the Mormonism is that when she went to Brigham Young, she got into Brigham Young, and they have a program with Oxford, isn't it? And probably the only way she could have ever got into Oxford was her shoo-in through Brigham Young University, where they had this whole group of students go over there. So she was very lucky, because if she had been outside of the system, the Brigham Young system, the Mormon system, she may never have had that opportunity to go and get that particular education.
They're very big in the.
Oops,
Barbara.
You're muted, Barbara.
You're muted, Barbara.
George's granddaughter George's son and daughter-in-law graduated from Brigham Young, as well as one of the granddaughters is in her senior year there. And they do help the families because, that's what the church is all about. And yes, I agree, Mary Ellen, it was Cambridge that she went to, and I'm sure that connection really helped her get that to go to Cambridge.
Because all of the opportunities that was open and available to her, as her father would say, the angels sent it. It really was not something that she seeked out, other than teaching herself out. Was it algebra? Getting the book and teaching herself? Yeah.
So in addition to the education, did she give credit to anything else that have assisted her thus far to get her to the place where she can attempt to write a book or make an impact? Did she continue with her faith? She obviously didn't have a family of her own that can say, hey, I now have my family, I'm doing this. any other influence in her life outside of education that could have made a positive turn for her?
She didn't talk about it in the book in that fashion.
Take a break.
I think towards, because there's like two parts of the book. There is home in the junkyard, and then there is university. And she talked about her struggles of being able to catch up, feel, and it wasn't until feel that level of insecure, because I mean, who wouldn't? You're sitting around talking to people and being around people who have, normal lives, and you're like, my dad is a doomsdayer, people they just want to slide themselves away from you. But it also talks about when she was able to get comfortable in Cambridge, of that her life is unique. The first time you go to school is university, and she is starting to feel comfortable with it, that level of insecurity or hiding, because she talked about not raising her hand after the Holocaust. She goes, I didn't raise my hand that whole term. That they weren't going to look at her sideways again. Linda, you had your hand up.
Yeah, one of the things that was mentioned, but very briefly, is when she first went to Cambridge and they were taking the walk, and everybody was terrified to walk along the ledge or the rock or whatever they were on, right. But yet she was totally at home. So there was an innate knowledge that she gained from her upbringing that a lot of people wouldn't necessarily have gotten because they're just in school, as right. opposed to that hands-on situation. So there was that side of it as well. So she's unique.
Yeah. That fearlessness of and again, that resourcefulness that they all have, and they all have it. And that was something that was drilled in. It was them against the world kind of thing. What time is it? We're getting close to our closing time. Yes, Barbara.
I Googled to find out something about her, and she says, and this might answer part of Durette's question. She said that the fact that she was able to gain access and different points of view and study to learn things was what changed her as a person. That had a big impact on the relationship she had with her family. It was really defining in terms of the choices I would make and how I would resolve that tension. I wonder if there are people in general where you grow up one way and the world looks one way when you're a child, and as you grow up, you have to hold and balance that tension between who you were and who you're trying to be, who your family thinks you are and who they want you to be. Maybe there's a whole lot of people who have to struggle with that question. I learned things, and those things that I learned changed me.
That's powerful right there, Barbara, because, as I was listening in to each of you, I thought, because if you look back, even in your own personal life, the areas that you had challenges with growing up, oftentimes are those areas that you're passionate about in helping others with. So your mess becomes your message, is how I tend to look at it. Because, whatever you went through as a child is a part of your foundation. So whether it is good or it is bad, you're going to continue to build on it in some direction. So for her, even though she had a negative foundation based on what Barbara just shared, she is choosing to use that some way, somehow, to go in a more positive direction in combination with the education. And hence the reason she was not able to talk about educated without going back there, because she's saying, this is my building block as a result of this that I've gone through, right. Is what motivates me and inspires me. So it makes me want to ask then, have we gotten any kind of reviews from her book where I know many of you mentioned, this was so awful, but anyone have said, reading her story has helped me, or I feel as if I'm not alone, or did any positive reviews came from it? Because I'm hoping she's fulfilling whatever her ultimate goal is.
I'm quite sure there's somebody out there who could identify, because there's so many different fanatical groups out there. and so many kids, especially now in an age where we live, that enlightenment of what's going on around the world is literally right in the palm of your hand. So I'm sure there's some kids who are like, mom and dad are crazy, and I'm only here for a shot. I can't wait to leave. I have a friend of mine who grew up on a bayou and lived with the same 24 families all her life. And the day of graduation, she moved to New York City.
Well,
So,
well, you know what? Even though there might not have been many people who are having raving reviews about her book, even just being in this conversation, it leaves us with a sense of appreciation that, hey, I might have gone through this growing up, but thankfully it is not as bad as that. And to know that someone went through that and they're still here. I might be going through something now, but there's hope, you know.
and that's how I
You made
opened
it
it.
through.
Yes, that's exactly
There's
how I opened it. Yes,
It
it's like,
also,
so you thought your family was dysfunctional.
All right.
also may,
Well, I
also may
think we
be
could all
on
relate a
New
little
York
bit to
bestseller.
dysfunctionality in our families, a little
Family.
bit.
Absolutely.
So we're going to wrap this up, and we want to thank Lorraine for doing a wonderful job in moderating this
Yes.
book, Educated. I hope those of you who haven't read it will read it. You'll find it very interesting and really a page turner, as Lorraine has said. Now, we do have the moderator of our next month's book club and 2 months away as well. So Linda, could you tell us a little bit about the book, The Surrender Experiment, that we're going to be talking about next month?
All right. The Surrender Experiment was written by Michael Singer, or Mickey Singer, as he likes to be known. I've actually met the author. It is almost an autobiography of his life from college age forward and how he then found it. But the biggest part that I would take away from the book is how, if you allow the universe to guide you, your life becomes better than you could imagine it to be. It's, in some respects, it reminds me of the Year of Yes that we read a few months ago, in that of saying yes to things that you wouldn't normally do. And there's an element of that in this book, but I just, in going through where he started from and how his life went through and where he ended up, it's just a phenomenal story. His other book, if you are interested in reading it, is called The Untethered Soul. It's a bit of a harder read, and it goes much more into more of a Zen Buddhist situation of things, but it's a fantastic read as well. It also makes a great icebreaker, because that's how I did my icebreaker for Toastmasters, was based on the book, The Untethered Soul. And if you read it, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about when you get to it. But like I said, he still lives in north of Gainesville in Alachua, Florida. And I have met him, and he did have, until COVID, he was still having services on his property on every Sunday.
He graduated from the University of Florida the same year I did.
Okay. Do you know him?
No.
Okay.
He was in economics.
Okay.
Okay, so Barbara, tell us a little bit about the book that we're going to be reading for 2 months.
Okay. The original book that I picked doesn't seem to be that available. So the other book I picked, and I know most of my division directors, well, I gave each of my division directors this book, The Power of a Positive Team by John Gordon. I love all of John Gordon's books. They're not very big. They're about this big, but he wrote The Seed. He wrote The Energy Bus. He wrote The No Complaining Rule. He has such wonderful words to share. And I think that you will enjoy this, because it really is apropos to Toastmasters, since we're all about being positive. And we do work in teams all the time, whether you're working as a family unit, as a team at work, or in Toastmasters or any other organization like church. So I think it will be beneficial for everyone, and I look forward to discussing it.
Okay, and if you're all on my email list, I'll send out a synopsis and the titles and all that in a few days. Now, there's another book club that I'm hoping to put together probably for July, and that would be Toastmasters who are authors. We might have like 3 authors in each meeting that could talk about their books. Now, we do have an author present in this group, and that's Linda Ellie. You've written a book, right, Linda?
I wrote a story in a compilation book, but yes, I have written a book. I am published, and it did go international bestseller.
Okay.
What is
And
it?
if any, go ahead. What's the title?
It's funny because I tend to underplay this aspect of things. You know what? Continue talking. I'll get a copy so you can see it.
All right. And we also have another author in the house. It's Chris Gould. And Chris has written a book. Tell us a little bit about your book, Chris. Oh, we can't see it. You're on blur.
Yeah, I see that.
Yeah.
So let me take it off.
Yeah, it's a little close. There you go.
There you go. Google Photos is my specialty. So I wrote a book about it. I teach it all the time. And now I've put enough effort into figuring out the way to teach it that I have it all in a book. Google Photos is by Google, and it is a way to manage all those thousands of photos that we take these days.
Okay. So yes, we have a couple authors right here. And can you imagine in District 47? We probably have a few people that have written books, I would imagine. So send the word out. I'm looking for you. And Linda,
Mine
go
is
ahead.
definitely not an international bestseller, though. I'm self-published. I just want it. I just wanted to. It is on Amazon, but
And it is interesting
because they
so
spent,
don't downplay it. Chris actually goes out to Google when there isn't COVID in the air every year to teach a class on photos. She probably knows more about their photos than Google does. So that's why they have her come in. Okay, Linda, go ahead.
So it's Ignite Your Adventurous Spirit. And it's one of the series in this series of Ignite books. And this one is all about travel and things that have happened on travel. It is, if you want hard copies, I do have plenty of hard copies that I can sell, or you can get the Kindle version on Amazon.
Okay. All right. So I want to thank all of you. Any other questions, comments before we wrap this up? All right. And Roosevelt, you've been in the background all night. We want to hear your blessings.
This concludes our March book club. Thank you. See you next month.
All right. Thank you.
Good
Good night, everybody. Enjoy
night.
your Saturday night.
All righty.
And you Sunday.
Mary Helen, can you stay 1 second? Just because I need to give you an email address to add to